Before dawn breaks over the skyline, trillions of dollars lie sleeping, pooled in funds managed by faces few will ever know. Your retirement savings, your parents' pension, the collective faith of millions, all orbit an empire built not on steel or stone, but on trust and opacity. Behind every smiling quarterly report is a network of managers, analysts, and silent power brokers whose decisions ripple through cities, homes, and futures. As the market opens, a new day begins not for workers but for watchers, those who trade time itself, disguising control behind the calm of spreadsheets. What happens when your safety net is also their throne? Every paycheck feeds the machine, a quiet transfer from hope to holding company. The index fund promises safety, but safety is never free. Deep within its structure, fees hide like whispers, leverage masquerades as growth, and complexity ensures only insiders can truly understand the stakes. For most, the fund is invisible, a benevolent ghost collecting dreams and dividends alike. But those who built it know invisibility is the ultimate protection. They call them fiduciaries, guardians of other people's money. Yet in every promise of protection lies temptation. Bonuses bloom when risk becomes performance, and performance can be painted however the board desires. For Edward, the system's genius was its distance. No fingerprints, no direct harm, only abstract outcomes expressed in quarterly returns. He once believed in survival. Now he believes in survival. Outside the glass towers, the streets tell a different ledger. Pensioners check balances that move like tides, their trust translated into distant digits. The empire thrives on abstraction. When value becomes invisible, control becomes absolute. The farther the money travels, the fewer eyes remain to witness its transformation. Somewhere between loyalty and leverage, the empire grows fat on faith. As night settles, markets close, but power does not sleep. Across oceans, trades echo in algorithms, passing like invisible tides through Tokyo, London, and back to New York. The empire breathes in cycles, drawing strength from every worker's withheld future. To the public, it's a promise. To those inside, it's an empire built on silence. And every empire hides a collapse, waiting for its cue. Trust is a currency more powerful than gold. It flows unseen through institutions, underwriting every contract, every pension, every illusion of stability. But trust, once monetized, becomes leverage. Edward knew this. He had built an empire trading not in assets but in faith. The firm's funds promised safety, but their architecture was a labyrinth. Derivatives wrapped around debt, opacity branded as innovation. To investors, it was genius. To Edward, it was scaffolding around a secret too large to reveal. Sarah was the bridge between idealism and obedience. She once believed diversification was protection, that models could predict greed. But numbers don't lie, they only obey. She discovered a pattern buried in the pension accounts, a cycle of trades looping through offshore vehicles, erasing footprints. The code was elegant, the deception precise. When she confronted Marcus, his eyes told her everything. They weren't hiding risk from regulators. They were hiding it from the people who owned the money. In another corner of the city, Lena chased whispers through dusty archives and encrypted emails. Pension reports marked confidential led her to offshore accounts under the same trust umbrella. Names changed, addresses mirrored, ownership blurred by design. Each revelation was a small fracture in a colossal wall. The deeper she went, the clearer it became. The empire didn't manage money. It managed belief. And belief, when fractured, becomes the most dangerous commodity of all. Marcus never saw himself as corrupt, only practical. His job was to ensure liquidity, to keep the river flowing even when the source ran dry. He knew where the blind spots were, where regulators preferred not to look. His loyalty was mathematical, not moral. Yet each night, as the numbers recalculated themselves, a new dread emerged. What if the system wasn't built to serve the people at all, but to outlast them? The next morning, Edward watched markets rise on rumors he'd carefully seeded months before. Each movement of the index was a note in his silent symphony of control. He once feared exposure. Now he feared irrelevance, because the empire didn't need him anymore. It had learned to sustain itself, algorithms feeding on the inertia of trust. Across the city, screens flickered to life, each a portal into the same illusion, that the future was secure. But beneath the surface, something had already begun to crack. Markets thrive on illusion, the belief that tomorrow will mirror today. But illusions are fragile, especially when built on borrowed faith. Sarah's discovery spread through the firm's encrypted channels like static on a wire. Edward's silence spoke louder than denial. The numbers didn't add up. The safe funds were tethered to speculative derivatives, disguised as income streams. Every pension, every retirement plan, every ounce of public trust had become collateral for ambition. The empire's beauty was its invisibility, its fragility, too. Edward didn't need to read the report. He'd written its foundation years ago. He knew the risk model was flawed, but so was human nature. Every system of wealth eventually becomes self-serving. Yet for him, exposure wasn't an option. His entire reputation, his legacy, and the faith of millions depended on the illusion's survival. As he stared at Sarah, he saw not rebellion, but inevitability. She wasn't the threat. She was the consequence. Lena's article hit the first online forums like a tremor before an earthquake. "Where is your pension, really?" the headline asked. A quiet storm brewed in public consciousness. Blogs, union meetings, social feeds. The story was small enough to ignore, but potent enough to plant doubt. Across the city, Edward's firm dismissed it as sensationalism. Yet within 24 hours, minor investors began to withdraw. Not because they believed Lena, but because they finally questioned everything they'd been told. Marcus found himself standing in two worlds, one of data and one of conscience. The more he tried to justify his role, the more hollow his victories felt. He remembered his father's pension disappearing decades ago, swallowed by another safe fund. That memory was his compass once, but ambition had dulled it. Now, as Sarah's accusations spread through whispers and Lena's article gained traction, Marcus realized something chilling. The empire was not collapsing from pressure. It was imploding from within. The first crack became a tremor. Funds once stable began to fluctuate inexplicably. Reporters called. Clients panicked. Edward's empire had no walls, only mirrors, and the reflections were fracturing. Sarah watched as denial spread faster than truth, while Lena prepared her next exposé, tracing the money trail overseas. The system's flaw was never technical, it was human. Every promise of safety had been traded for one more day of confidence. But confidence, once broken, never returns quietly. Markets do not fall, they unravel. The first drop was subtle, a whisper on trading floors, a twitch in data feeds. But then came the cascade. Algorithms designed for stability began to cannibalize themselves, dumping assets faster than humans could react. Edward watched the indexes blink red across continents. Every safeguard he'd engineered became a fuse. What had been built to protect was now collapsing with mathematical precision. For the first time in decades, the empire was silent, and silence in finance is the sound of fear. Sarah's phone buzzed non-stop. Clients, journalists, regulators. Her inbox filled with demands for answers she no longer had. The models were unraveling, their variables rebelling against logic. Every number she trusted turned traitor. But deep within the chaos, a revelation emerged. The same algorithm that fueled collapse had been repurposed months earlier by Marcus. He hadn't just hidden losses, He'd automated deception. The empire wasn't just falling. It was feeding on the very data that once sustained it. Marcus had disappeared into the firm's server room, chasing ghosts of code like a confessor in a digital cathedral. He believed he could stop it, reverse the cascade, rewrite the script, but the algorithm was alive now, self-correcting, self-consuming. Each keystroke only deepened the spiral. He realized too late that he had built something incapable of remorse. In the dim glow of machine lights, Marcus saw his reflection on the server racks, a man no longer in control, only a witness to his own creation's judgment. Lena's story had gone viral. What began as a whisper became an outcry. A million retirees refreshing their balances, watching zeros vanish like morning mist. She stood outside the firm's headquarters, cameras flashing, her voice trembling between outrage and disbelief. The empire had been unmasked, its grandeur reduced to a cautionary tale of trust misplaced. Yet behind her eyes burned something more profound than anger. Grief. For a system that taught people to worship what would one day devour them. Night fell like an audit. Markets shuttered, regulators convened, and screens across the world went black. Edward stood alone in his office, overlooking the skyline that once glittered with certainty. He realized the collapse wasn't born of greed or ignorance. It was born of faith without accountability. The retirement fund had become a god no one dared question. And now the god had turned on its believers. Outside, sirens echoed through the canyons of finance. Inside, Edward whispered a confession to no one. We were never managing belief. We were managing belief. When the empire fell, it didn't explode. It dissolved. Screens went dark, portfolios froze, and silence swept through trading floors that once pulsed like living veins. What lingered wasn't loss, but realization. Decades of trust, neatly quantified and leveraged, had turned to vapor. For Edward, the collapse was both punishment and liberation. He no longer had to lie to others or himself. The empire had simply obeyed its own design, extract until empty. And now, there was nothing left to extract. Sarah sat before the regulatory board, her voice steady, her guilt restrained by duty. She told them everything: the false risk models, the hidden transfers, the illusion of diversification. But as she spoke, she realized confession was not redemption. The board didn't want truth. They wanted closure. She had expected fury, but found fatigue. The system would survive, patched and rebranded, until the next reckoning. Truth, she thought, was never designed to reform. It was designed to reset. Marcus didn't testify. He vanished into the outer circuits of finance, consulting for firms that promised ethical rebuilding. But he knew ethics was just a new algorithm, another mask. Every model still chased growth. Every projection still demanded faith. Yet, at night, when the city slept, he wrote code no one paid for. Models that prioritized sustainability over profit. It was futile, maybe even naive. But for the first time in years, the math felt human again. Lena's investigation became history. A documentary watched by millions, shared across continents, dissected in classrooms. But the applause felt hollow. She had exposed the empire, yet people still believed in new ones rising. Human memory, she realized, was cyclical. Outrage fades and faith rebuilds itself around the next promise. Still, she kept writing, not to warn, but to remember. Because the real empire wasn't hidden in funds or firms. It was hidden in forgetfulness. Months later, Edward visited the pension office. No entourage, no security, just another name in a queue. He handed over his own withdrawal form, smiling at the irony. As the clerk processed the paperwork, he looked around. Tired faces, hopeful eyes, people still believing in systems they would never understand. Outside, the city was rebuilding, new towers rising from old ashes. The empire was gone, but its shadow remained. Edward stepped into sunlight, carrying nothing but memory. For once, he felt weightless. Reconstruction doesn't begin with capital. It begins with belief. In the ashes of collapse, institutions scrambled to rebuild reputations faster than regulations. But the real rebuilding happened in living rooms, not boardrooms. People began to question where their money slept at night, who it served, and what it built. Across the world, small cooperatives emerged, slow, cautious, transparent. For the first time in a generation, finance felt human again, uncertain but sincere. Sarah returned to work, not in skyscrapers, but in classrooms. She taught financial literacy to those who'd lost the most. She no longer believed in perfect systems, only informed citizens. Transparency, she would tell her students, isn't a policy, it's a practice. And as she spoke, she felt something stir inside her that no algorithm could quantify. Purpose. The empire had taken her faith in finance, but had returned something far rarer. Faith in people. Marcus moved far from Wall Street, settling in a small town near the coast. He built an open-source network, code freely available to anyone who wanted to audit their community funds. His project gained quiet traction among teachers, nurses, small unions. No ads, no shareholders, no secrets. At night, he would walk the empty docks and watch the tide pull away, whispering to himself that value, like water, should always remain visible. Edward faded from headlines but not from memory. He lived quietly in a coastal town, helping small businesses with their ledgers. Each morning he would open the paper and see new firms promising reform, fresh faces repeating old phrases. He no longer felt anger, only awareness. Systems, he thought, don't change because they fail. They change because someone remembers why they mattered. And so he wrote, not reports, but reflections, letters to a future he hoped would read. Faith returned in fragments, through education, cooperation, and memory. No single leader, no towering firm, no trillion-dollar fund would ever command it again. The empire's ruins had become a lesson, carved not in marble, but in experience. Lena's documentary ended with a simple truth. Money isn't the foundation of trust. Trust is the foundation of money. As the world moved forward, slower but wiser, humanity rediscovered what it had almost sold away: the courage to question. Years passed and the collapse became history, an event reduced to textbooks and documentaries, its pain softened by time. But beneath the statistics lay the unrecorded legacy. People who no longer trusted blind growth, who demanded to see what their savings built, and who refused to surrender agency to invisible hands. A generation had learned that every system is only as honest as its memory. The empire was gone, but its echo had redefined an era. Sarah's students had become educators, regulators, and entrepreneurs. They built financial systems grounded in transparency, open ledgers visible to all. Watching them, she realized her legacy wasn't her career or her confessions. It was the people she had taught to doubt kindly and to verify relentlessly. She understood now. Ethics wasn't the absence of greed, but the discipline to resist it. Marcus's open-source code had evolved into a global movement, cooperatives using his platform to self-govern their resources without middlemen. He declined every offer of corporate partnership. For him, integrity was not a product but a practice. As he walked through a crowded local market, he saw handwritten signs reading, community-owned, accountable, transparent. He smiled. The words that once doomed him now defined him. Edward lived long enough to witness a quiet redemption. One morning, a letter arrived, signed by Lena, Sarah, and Marcus. It was a simple thank you, not for what he built, but for what he helped dismantle. He smiled as he read it, realizing legacy isn't measured in wealth retained, but in lessons remembered. He folded the letter, placed it in his ledger, and closed it for the last time. Outside, the sea reflected sunlight like liquid gold. Unnowned, unpriced, infinite. At a university decades later, Lina's film played for a new generation. Students too young to remember the collapse but old enough to inherit its consequences. The documentary ended with Edward's final words: "Transparency is not protection. It is participation." The auditorium fell silent. Outside, the world buzzed with new markets, new risks, new empires. But for a brief moment, reflection triumphed over ambition. And in that silence, faith, earned, fragile, and honest, began again.